I've been shot. Someone broke in and shot me. Please hurry. That was the muffled cry of a young woman, ringing out in the middle of the night in Gilbert, Arizona. It was 2 a.m. The 911 call came from a young woman, shaking but still conscious. She said she had been shot. A stranger had broken into her apartment. Police immediately dispatched vehicles to the apartment complex. But with dozens of identical houses, locating the apartment was not easy. When they arrived, the girl was still alive. Blood was all over the floor. But the strangest thing was, the apartment door was still locked. There was no sign of vandalism. No one else was inside. And to this day, no one has paid the price for what happened that night. The girl's name was Rachel Hansen, 19 years old, student, working part-time, living alone. 3 years later, the case is still unsolved. No one knows who fired the shots, and no one understands why police kept quiet about the final call recording. A case with more than 20 blurred body cam videos, a 911 call that was never heard back, and a family still waiting for answers. Who killed Rachel Hansen, and why so far has no one been held accountable? Rachel Hansen lived alone in the Val Vista Classic Apartments in Gilbert, Arizona. A freshman, she worked part-time outside of school and was described as a calm, antisocial person. Neighbors described her as polite, but quite private. About 3 days before the incident, in early June 2022, Rachel had mentioned to friends that she was feeling uneasy. In a text message, she said that the night before she went to sleep, someone had opened her bedroom door while she was in bed. No one was supposed to be there. She checked the area but found no obvious signs of forced entry, no broken doors, and no missing items. However, she began locking her bedroom door from the inside every night, something she rarely did before. On June 3rd, the day before the incident, Rachel had no unusual activity. She stopped by a nearby coffee shop in the afternoon, bought her usual iced smoothie, and left less than 10 minutes later. Security cameras in the apartment complex also recorded Rachel returning to her room around 7:30 p.m. No one has seen her leave the house since. Between 7:30 p.m. on June 3rd and 2 a.m. on June 4th, when Rachel made the 911 call, there was no record of anyone visiting or having direct contact with her. But what makes the case puzzling is that the apartment complex does not have hallway cameras, and Rachel's door was not forced open. Her personal belongings, electronics, and valuables were all intact. There were no signs of ransacking or theft. Several neighbors reported hearing a slight noise around 1:45 a.m., but none recognized it as a gunshot. The walls between the apartments were thin, but echoes in the late night could easily be confused with the sounds of daily life. No one expected anything bad to happen in such a quiet place. Rachel, in the hours before her death, did not send any texts, make any phone calls, and did not post anything on social media. She seemed to have fallen asleep until a noise woke her, and then she called 911. At 2:03 a.m. on June 4, 2022, Gilbert 911 received a call from a cell phone. The caller was a young woman, her voice hoarse but clear. "I've been shot. Someone broke in and shot me. Please come quick." It was Rachel Hansen. The operator immediately asked Rachel for her address, the condition of her wound, and to confirm that she was alone. Rachel answered repeatedly for the first 2 minutes. She said she had nothing to stop the bleeding, no one was with her, and that the person who shot her had left. Her voice then became weaker, but she continued to stay on the line, answering each question intermittently. Gilbert police were dispatched to the Val Vista Classic Apartments shortly thereafter. However, the GPS system had trouble pinpointing the exact apartment to go to, since the cell phone signal did not indicate a room number. It took them nearly 5 minutes to narrow down the address. When they arrived, they knocked on the door. No response. The door was not locked from the inside, and there was no sign of forced entry. The police decided to go inside. In the dim light of the hallway lights, they found Rachel lying on her side on the floor between the bedroom and the kitchen. She was still breathing, but very weakly, and blood had stained the tile. She had no weapon on her, no phone. The phone was found a few feet away, the screen still on. The surroundings were in stark contrast to the victim's condition. Chairs were tucked away, tables were not knocked over, and furniture was in order. There were no signs of a struggle, and nothing was missing. Some internal reports later said that the police had made a preliminary check of the adjacent apartment to see if anyone had heard anything unusual. But no one was clear. Although it only took a few minutes from the time the call was made to the time the police arrived, that was a long time in an emergency situation. The fire truck and paramedics arrived shortly after, stabilizing the victim before transporting him to the hospital. What puzzled many involved was, if it was a break-in, why was there no sign of a forced entry? If it was someone they knew, why were there no cameras recording anyone entering or leaving the building during that time frame? Everything at the scene was too clean, too quiet, and too clueless, as if no one had ever entered except Rachel herself. After being taken to the hospital with severe blood loss, Rachel Hansen was pronounced dead shortly thereafter. The forensic report noted she had been shot in the lower left abdomen. The wound penetrated soft tissue and caused severe damage to internal organs. There were no bruises on her body, no signs of struggle or resistance. Rachel was wearing pajamas, not disheveled, no signs of being dragged or moved after being injured. The police returned to the scene that night to conduct a forensic examination. At the first-floor apartment where Rachel lived, there were no signs of ransacking or theft. The main door was closed, not forced open. The windows were locked from the inside. No furniture was knocked over or moved unusually. Of note was the location of the bloodstain. The first streak was near the bedroom door, then extended into two broken segments towards the middle of the living room. This suggests that the victim tried to move after being injured, perhaps to find a phone or escape, but was too late. Under the dining table, police found a small object, a piece of black plastic that did not match anything in the house. The piece of plastic was later sent for testing, but did not match any database at the time. One discrepancy that investigators noted: the bullet wound went straight, without an angle, suggesting that the shooter was standing quite close, almost directly across from the victim. However, Rachel left no sign of opening the door or inviting anyone in. So how did that person get in? And why were there no obvious noises heard by neighbors? In a case where the crime scene is so neat that it is almost clean, it is the smallest details that are the only things to cling to. When news of Rachel Hansen's death was confirmed on the morning of June 4th, 2022, the Gilbert Police Department's investigation team immediately upgraded the case to the highest priority. A task force was formed, tasked with analyzing the entire chain of events from the time Rachel called 911 until her death at the hospital. First, the scene. Every object in the apartment was photographed, sealed, and sent for testing. The victim's phone, found near her location, contained conversations, activity logs, and search history, all of which were downloaded for analysis. However, there were no text messages or calls from the time period that indicated threats, stalking, or interpersonal conflict. Next came the retrieval of the cameras. The Val Vista Classic apartment complex has surveillance cameras installed at the entrance and parking lot, but no cameras in the hallways or apartment doors. Police reviewed video footage from 7 p.m. on June 3rd to 3 a.m. on June 4th. Several people were seen entering and exiting the area, but no one was recorded approaching Rachel's apartment during the hours in question. DNA samples were collected from doorknobs, phones, and the area around the bloodstain. Several samples that did not match Rachel's DNA were sent to the federal database SOTUS for comparison, but no matches were confirmed. The questioning began within the first week after the incident. Neighbors on both sides, residents upstairs and downstairs, close friends and co-workers at their part-time jobs were all called in for questioning. All reported that Rachel lived a quiet life, with no recent signs of unusual behavior or conflicts. Some people recalled that Rachel had said that someone had opened her bedroom door 2 nights earlier, but that she thought she had made a mistake or perhaps forgotten to lock it. One theory was that it could have been a break-in. However, this theory was quickly discredited, as there was no sign of forced entry and no property had been taken. So if it wasn't a burglary, who could it be? And how did they know how to get into the apartment without leaving a trace? The police turned to the structure of the building. Rachel's apartment was on the ground floor, at the end of the row, secluded and unobtrusive. There was a side entrance from the back lawn to the kitchen window, but the window was locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry. A piece of black plastic was found under the dining table, not matching any other items in the house. It was sent for a materials and structural analysis. The result, a plastic trim that could have belonged to a weapon handle or a small hard object. But no device has been identified as the source. After 3 months, the case has stalled. No suspects, no clear motive. Body cam video from police, which captured the approach to the scene, was released nearly a year later, but much of it was blurred, cut off, or masked. Police said it was a measure to protect the public's identity and preserve the confidentiality of the investigation. But for Rachel's family, the ambiguity was unacceptable. Rachel's mother, Kim Hansen, told the press that she never heard her daughter's voice during the 911 call, even though it was Rachel's last words. The family was only given a printed transcript. They began hiring a private investigator, and they sent requests to the media and victim support organizations to expand the investigation independently. Throughout 2023 and 2024, the investigation team continued to sift through every little clue. Several potential suspects were interviewed, but there was no evidence strong enough to prosecute. The internal investigation report ran to more than 350 pages, but when it was made public, much of it was redacted or redacted. By June 2025, 3 years after the murder, police officially acknowledged that Rachel Hansen's case had not yet made any progress and was being treated as a cold case. Silent witness increased the reward to $15,000 for any information leading to an arrest or identification of the killer. A small glimmer of hope came from the widespread deployment of new DNA analysis technologies. If someone had come into contact with a crime scene in the future, the stored data could trigger a late match. Rachel's family maintained regular contact with the police and a private investigator, but the answers they had waited 3 years for were still elusive. To this day, the case remains a mystery. A young woman called for help, telling people she had been shot, but 3 years later, no one has been arrested. No trial has been held, and not a single line of DNA has identified the person who did it all. In June 2025, exactly 3 years after Rachel Hansen called 911 from her apartment, the case remains unsolved. No arrests have been made, no court hearings have been held, and no indictments have been filed. Her family has repeatedly requested updates, but each response has been met with the same familiar phrase: "We're still investigating." The problem isn't the timing, but the way the information seems to be released only piecemeal, and never in full. The crime scene videos have been released nearly 2 years later, but none of them capture the entire process of initial access and processing. The footage appears fragmented, lacking audio and edited, leaving viewers guessing rather than understanding. The family has requested access to the 911 call transcript, but they have been denied. The only thing they had was a typed transcript of the conversation. No sound, no emotion. What remained in the investigative file, the mother said, just added to the void. Faced with the prolonged silence, the family took the initiative to seek more information from their side. But after 3 years, every approach had hit a dead end. No new witnesses, no additional visual data, no confirmed identification. Rachel had spoken up, had called for help, but after all this time, no one had come forward to claim responsibility. The legal documents were still on the table, but the victim's presence, every word, every trace, seemed to be eroding over the years. The table where Rachel had dined was now where the mother placed a photo of her daughter every time she returned to the apartment. A small corner that no one touched, as if to preserve what was left. Rachel Hansen was just 19 when she died. At an age when many are starting the first chapters of their lives, she called 911 to say she had been shot, and no one could save her. Despite being conscious when she called, despite giving her address, her condition, and her request for help, 3 years later, her case remains unsolved. That silence has left not only a family devastated, but also a warning to the community. When a young person calls for help, and that call doesn't lead to justice, the problem isn't just with the killer, it's with the gaps in the system, the lack of hallway cameras, the limitations of DNA analysis, the sloppy disclosure process, and a society that sometimes lets cold cases go. Forensics, surveillance, data, all of which were once considered supporting technologies, are now vital to solving crimes. And what's needed more than that is public attention. Not to talk about it, but to remind you, an unsolved case is a promise unkept. And if it's not Rachel, it's your daughter? Would you let it all slip quietly into oblivion?